My name's Tristan, and I'm a creative. I've been painting and modeling for over 10 years at this point. I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means, but I would like to say that I have some degree of knowledge of when it comes to crafting aesthetically pleasing things. But I have never been a great salesman. But I'm also tired of being a broke, wagey artist who paints part-time and prefer to be a broke artist full-time. I intend for 2026 to be a better year for this, so hopefully my incoherent art ramblings I am going to make going forward can be some use to you. I've been creatively minded since I can remember. My mother studied art history in school and my dad English, as well as being a hobbyist photographer. Needless to say, I grew up with some people with some opinions on creative endeavors. Matisse and Picasso were common names on the bookshelves growing up, and while I didn't understand always what exactly I was looking at, I could tell something about them was important to get, as it were. My problem is that I get stuck working on big ideas. I don't like to paint the typical D&D/Warhammer level miniatures that often, because they end up being an exercise in atomic level pigment placement. I've always been drawn to larger scale busts and monsters, or just larger projects for the more open workspace. But more than that, I value art as an exercise of personal expression and emotionality rather than as a pure craft of transitions and technical precision, however much that may be beneficial towards communicating your idea or winning medals. I want to make big expressive works, but trying to condense a multi-month long project into a single video when you're starting out is pretty damn challenging. So to that end, I figured I would discuss a bit of my starting elements that can benefit you, the beginner, in getting started with miniature modeling. For whatever reason, you've gotten into miniature modeling, be it for your D&D game, Warhammer collection, polycule, whatever. You've got the desire to paint little army men, so where do you begin? You begin by pulling out your wallet and buying some tools. Obviously, you need a model to work with, but let's assume that you have that already. Pretty much any modeling endeavor is going to require some version of the following things. Primer to aid your initial painting with, modeling tools to fix and assemble your models with, paint to paint with, brushes to move your paint along with, and a palette to put your paint onto and then move around with the brush with. I've got an assortment of different primers these days. These are aerosol rattle can primers of various colors and finishes, ranging from metallic to satin to matte. The point of a primer is to set up a good foundation for overlaying coats of color, via unifying the different potential materials of your sculpt underneath one tone and giving it some physical tooth or paint to grab onto. There are many out there in every color you could ever possibly want, but I personally recommend neutral tones, black, gray, white, and if you're daring, brown of some sort. I like this iron oxide color. Why not get the fancy colors? Simple, they're unitaskers. A vibrant color can save you a step by unifying everything underneath one tone, coloring and priming in a single pass. But if you're painting a yellow subject and you only have blue primer, unless you know what you're doing, you're going to have to actively fix some steps along the way. Monument and Games Workshop make good primers, but they can be a little pricey for what you're getting. Your local hardware store can fulfill your needs here, but you might need to experiment to find the right stuff. Personally, I like Krylon's spray style and the solid flat finish that it has. Now we need tools. This is an endless well of particulars and optimization that could extend forever, but some tools are more vital than others. I have 5 knives, quite a small collection compared to my fellow modelers across the pond. While I have some fancy ones of handles and differently shaped blades, those can come in later. I use the normal ones with the basic shaped blade 90% of the time. Side clippers will be necessary for getting clean cuts off a spruce sheet or just cutting up parts in the future. I have 2, one for general purposes and one specifically for plastic. These here are very nice nippers and they give an exceptionally flush cut. And they better because they cost 4 times the other. So I don't recommend these to people who are starting out. The base nippers will do just fine for you. CA glue is just super glue. Cyanoacrylate glue is just the fancy name for it. You will definitely need this stuff to put models together with. Here, branding is almost entirely worthless. I haven't been able to tell a difference in behaviors after almost a decade of experience. The only significant thing to consider is that the bottle design and the volume of glue that you get. Some are better than others here, because something like Gorilla Glue's bottle will actually keep the air out. Each time you expose CA glue to air, it cures a little more, and eventually it thickens up to a point that you can't even use it and you gotta get a new bottle. Consider this when you buy a large volume of glue. Are you really gonna use it before it spoils? I would stick to an ounce or less for the normal style stuff for your first go around. You can also use plastic cement. Unlike superglue, this stuff literally dissolves plastic before solidifying, effectively acting as a welding agent. The resulting bond is very strong, and it has very little mass, which prevents any sort of ugly glue warts from being a possibility. That strength is sometimes a problem, however, when you make a mistake, because breaking the parts is a lot uglier than with CA, and it can't be easily fixed. And because it only works on plastic, it cannot be your go-to for everything. You also want to grab a bottle of white glue in order to put your grass and stuff to bases with. Thick glue is generally a better idea in this initial stage because you can dilute it to a thin consistency, therefore it is more flexible. Personally, I like tacky glue, but damn near anything craft-oriented will work here. Something like Elmer's Glue All will work very well. But something like Elmer's School Glue, that's crap. That's designed for children as an appetizer for their macaroni sculptures, not for serious grown-up crafts involving little sculpted wizards. Poster tack is mostly just for us to get little handles out of things we have lying around. You can use pretty much anything here, blocks of wood, pill bottles, more questionable stuff. Stick and go, and you can get to painting your models. You'll also want to get some putty to fix your models with. And there are many out there, but the two industry standards are green stuff, milliput. Both are good buys for different purposes. I would get one of each. And now for the big question. What kind of paint should you buy? That, as the kids say, is a nebulous AF question, because they're in a big hurry. When you first look at a paint rack at the game store, your eyes are probably going to glaze over at the sight of 14 different blue tones they sell. Look, I get it. Internet discourse over paint is damn near endless, and it seems like everyone and their mom has their own paint line these days. I got a tool chest that I store all my stuff in, and it's damn near filled up with different paints. I've not tried every paint under the sun, but I've tried a lot, and I can tell you at this stage, they're not important. What you need right now is a perspective on one of them, in order to get a perspective on anything else. You want your initial purchase to be a kind of rock to rely on when branching out to other stuff. To that end, my recommendation is that you go to your local art store and buy your starting colors from them. This concept of using artist branded paints has only recently began to catch ground amongst modelers, but it pays dividends. Things like model colors are consistent, but weak, than artist colors, as they aim to make their yellows behave the same as their blues. In effect, any one color's specific strengths and weaknesses get averaged out to fit the paint designer's vision. That has some value, but it can lead to a very warped understanding of your materials when they're being altered behind the scenes without your knowledge. Things like artist colors are strong, but chaotic. Here, the color is in a relatively unmodified state, but with more personality that requires learning to utilize properly. If you want to advance, you might as well face this problem head-on from the start, like how other artists do. You might have a slightly longer learning curve, but you'll understand your materials in a way that many painters in this field simply don't. Also, the versatility and strength of artist-branded paint is just a lot better than that of model lines, for reasons that we'll get to at another date. Enough of me extolling virtues. What do you actually buy? There are many amazing colors out there, but not all are super easy to use. They're too transparent, too strong, whatever. We need a base to work off of before we get to specialty things. This list is a good starting point. You'll find a copy of this in the description. If you can't afford a full set, since this is a fair amount of paint to buy in your first go-around, then a more limited list can function, though you do lose some flexibility. It's not super important that you get exactly the right colors here. Approximates are fine. That goes for hobby tones as well. But you do want to stay away from things that have cadmium or cobalt in the name right now. Those are potentially dangerous if you handle them incorrectly, and you should opt into using those paints when you have a better knowledge of safe practices. Not that I'm accusing you of being some sort of paint eater or anything. You'd also want to get some model branded metallics. These are specially formulated for miniatures, and they possess a coverage that lacks in artistic brands, because they're not considering the scale we work at. Good for things like cosplay, not good for the tiny scales that we're working at. What's with the letters and numbers next to these names here? These are pigment codes, and they tell you exactly what's in the containers of paint you pick up. These are standardized within the industry and allow artists to know exactly what it is they're working with. When a manufacturer calls their paint quote-unquote peacock blue, it could be a number of things, but PB29 is always pigment blue 29, ultramarine blue. And no, the name does not come from the Space Marines.
We claim this in the Emperor's name!
If you're going to the art store and makes you squeamish, then you can get a starting paint kit. I would personally recommend Vallejo or AK Interactive. I like AK paint more, but the starting box doesn't have any metallics, which can be annoying. Army Painter's okay too though. For artist lines, Liquitex gouache is good, Holbeon's acrylic gouache is alright, Golden So-Flat is fine, but they have annoying bottles to deal with, and I would avoid most other things from Golden from now, due to their paint composition being designed primarily for canvas, and they can be a little hard to adapt into modeling from the word go. Some ink will also be helpful for us. A full set of colors would be best, but that's really expensive, so red, yellow, and blue will do for now. The specifics don't really matter so much, just having the ink of the right color is enough. Rarely, however, is it the case that materials significantly impact the final result. Superb work can come from subpar materials, and it's not necessary to learn the finest paints. Rarely, however, do good results come from subpar tools. In an ideal setting, you would outfit yourself with the best brushes you get your hands on, from the very beginning. They just function better than the cheap ones, which are bad from the start and age into worthless sticks. Good brushes last longer, they age better, and can still be useful when they're past their prime. In my most humble of opinions, a single brush that's less than $10 raises some suspicion. There are decent budget brushes out there, but they are not the norm. But that really deserves a far more in-depth explanation than what I can do here, and it's not too important to start with. A pack of basic synthetic brushes in various sizes will do, but getting a good quality brush early on can be an enlightening experience. As a side note, a lot of people that see my work ask me if I use really tiny brushes to paint them with. I don't, at least not in the way most people think. Small brushes grant a large amount of precision, but they also hold very small amounts of paint, which prevents you from doing anything more than the smallest brushstroke before it completely unloads. I use brushes as large as a 6 on even a basic wargaming model. Not for everything, but for many things. Try your hand at a variety of shapes. A good filbert brush, that which is flat with rounded edges, is good to have in your collection, as it makes painting large flat areas far easier. And finally, you need something to hold your paint with. This can be simple as a plate, but my suggestion is that you go buy some paper towels and some parchment paper from the grocery store. Read, parchment paper, not wax paper. Maybe also consider a large baking tray that could fit that parchment paper that comes in pre-cut squares. Why, do you ask? Well, I'll tell you. Next time. Sub to see it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and have a good one.